All right, so you're going to rebuild your two-stroke top end and you've got it all apart and you've got your new cylinder or your cylinder replated or your cylinder bored and you think just slap it back together. That's what the service manual says to do. But wait, I've got 4 pro tips for you to rebuild it even better so that it lasts even longer. For the first tip, you're going to need your service manual and you're going to need a calipers. So you may want to skip this step, but this is the first critical step because if you got a new cylinder, this one's from Athena, and you've got an aftermarket piston from Wiseco, these are not the same brand. These have not been checked together. The first tip is to check the cylinder diameter to the piston diameter. And your manual has this piston to cylinder clearance info. There's also a wear limit. So sometimes what's happened is that it is too tight for what you need to do and it needs to be honed out some more. Or if they've done a sloppy job on boring it and it's too loose, you're gonna wear out too fast. Ooh, look, it comes in a little bag like Crown Royal. Cute little 125 piston. All right, so you need your service manual because most of the time to measure a piston is not perfectly round. Piston has a taper from this end to the other. This end is larger, this end is smaller. The service manual tells me on this YZ125 that you measure 17.5 millimeters from the bottom of the skirt and up. So I put a mark on there, I'm gonna measure it 17.5 millimeters up, and that's my measurement. That's the proper way to measure your cylinder. A lot of them are 10 millimeters from the bottom. Your service manual will tell you exactly where to measure the piston so you can get that correct. Make sure to use a good quality caliper so you can get it accurate. Then you check your cylinder. Your cylinder should be perfectly round all the way around. So you can check it at a couple of spots on the top and the bottom. Most of the time it should be all the same. Then you take those two measurements, difference between the two, and that's your cylinder clearance. Most of the time it's very, very small, like less than a millimeter. And a good check for that is the piston just barely slides in there. Very, very nice and tight. The second pro tip is to check your cylinder. Now you may have a new cylinder, you may have a replated cylinder, or you might have a bored cylinder. Either way, when the job is being done, the ports on the inside are supposed to be nice and chamfered. They're not supposed to have a sharp edge to them. So you can feel with your finger down in there if they are nice and sharp. They should have a small chamfer. This is like 0.5 millimeter chamfer. These are all done by hand, one way or another. Even if it's done at the factory, it's usually done by hand to be able to have a nice radius. Now, if you find some sharp edges, you need to get out your needle files. Now I use a nice rounded needle file. If you don't have a set of needle files, I've got some in the link in the description below for some nice inexpensive ones that should work for you. You don't want ones with a big handle in case you need to get in there. Just put a light chamfer on the sides of the ports. Now, this is just a cleanup because something should have been done, but maybe they didn't quite get it. So you're gonna look all around real close because maybe they didn't get it right in the corner real well and it's real sharp in there, and that's gonna easily catch a piston ring and scrape off the oil that is running right there along that piston. So this is what you're checking. You're getting really meticulous on how those ports look. You're going to want it to file at about a 45-degree angle. Again, you don't need much, you just need the sharpness off of there. Hopefully you're just checking it. All right, pro tip number 3 for your top end goes to the piston. We're doing this exact same thing. What happens is when they machine a piston, they have nice sharp edge along the bottom. Now, the manufacturers, even this nice Wiseco piston, have taken and chamfered the edges, but it's still pretty sharp. And what happens is, as this goes up and down in the cylinder, that sharp edge scrapes the oil away. So what we want to do is we want to provide a nice chamfer all the way around along the edges so that that oil does not get scraped away with a nice sharp edge. We want the oil to be able to be on the sides of the piston and not be scraping away. You don't need much, you just need a light chamfer on there to take the corner off. We're not putting a big radius on the thing, just taking and putting a nice smooth edge on there. You'll feel the difference, especially the pistons right here are usually nice and sharp. Right here usually already have a chamfer that you'll just be cleaning up slightly. And if you've got the window on a piston such as this too, check the window of the piston. You're going to want to check that. I see this one already has a chamfer from the factory, but I'm just going to clean it up a little bit to make it nice and smooth. You can do the piston pin bosses as well, as those are sometimes a little bit sharp, but be careful as you're digging in not to gouge the inside of that boss so that your piston pin still slides in very smooth. You don't want to damage that surface. And last but not least is you've got a couple of oil holes right here that I'm going to use my pointed round file to put just a little chamfer on to make sure that those are not sharp, as these don't have any chamfering whatsoever. All right, pro tip number 4 is again with the piston. As you can see with the cylinder has nice crosshatch marks. The crosshatch marks are there to hold oil as microscopically right there against the cylinder. Now your piston has machine marks going this direction. So what we want to do is we want to take a red Scotch-Brite pad. If you don't have one of these, link in the description below. We'll get you some. They're not very expensive. You should have these around for cleaning up things anyways. What we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're going to start to put cross-hatch marks at a 45-degree angle both directions. Now if you've got a coated piston, you're going to actually have to skip this step on the coated parts. If it just has a coated section, maybe you can hit around the coated parts, but you don't want to do this to a coated piston. This one's just a standard piston that's not real heavy. Just go light at a nice 45 degrees all the way around. You'll start to see the scratch marks go right in pretty easily, pretty quick. 45 degrees one way and then go 45 degrees the other, so you have a cross hatch mark. Be careful not to drop your piston. Drop the piston, probably time to get a new one. Okay, this is about what your piston should look like now. All these modifications done to the cylinder and the piston should help keep the oil on the cylinder walls and not being scraped away as fast, helping to increase the longevity of your top end. Then you're going to want to go and wash the piston to make sure it's got all of the aluminum debris that you just created off of there. I can see it's all over my hands, so you don't want to put that in a fresh bore. You want this nice and clean. And I assume I don't need to tell you to check the ring end gap. Ring goes in the cylinder. Check the gap to the service manual. Make sure it's big enough. If not, use a little file, again the needle files, to file down the ring end gap. You don't want those too tight. You want what the service manual spec says. And there you have it. You've got a much better setup on being able to hold the oil inside there. You can start to bolt everything together, torque everything down, and you should have a much longer lasting top end on your two-stroke.